We all live? All right, so we put together some notes on discussion items today, but I think for a little while we may sit just and discuss kind of current events that's going on in the world, some stuff that I was listening, some videos I was watching, some things, and we'll just see where it goes. Right? This is just a discussion. That's the whole beauty of it. But I was watching this video where Ray Dalio, who ran a really, really large hedge fund, kind of was a guru for calling the 2008 financial crisis, and saved his clients a lot of money in the process. He wrote this book where he did this study, or he had a lot of high-paid staff people to go do research to figure out how the economics of the world happened over history. And they're trying to figure out, is for him, and even when he claimed around 2008, if you can recognize a pattern, those patterns will always exist, follow the patterns, and you can, in essence, almost try to predict the future, which is what he's trying to do. And so this book is really around the rise and fall of economic superpowers in the world. And it was I was watching these graphs that he had up, talking about the Dutch in the late 1700s, early 1800s into the British, and that rise and fall of the 1800s into early 1900. And then America came in. And we as Americans, I would challenge mostly watching this. And he went on to say, and then how it's reaching over the peak on its way down as you're seeing China in a super fast pace move up. And so it's kind of a hint indicator that of what may be to come. And, as an American, I'm like, whoa, excuse me? Excuse me?
America best.
Yeah, well, that's not, there's no way that could happen. That couldn't be real. We're the powerhouse. It was just, and man, I mean, he went down. I'm a nerd on numbers and stuff. Well, to an extent, financial numbers, not accounting level numbers, like the 10,000 foot view. But he was just discussing about how in the 1940s, the devaluation of currency. And then in 1971, he was on the stock exchange floor. It's like a courier. And that's when the announcement was made that we were moving away from the gold standard and having gold backing our currency to nothing. And how he thought the stock market would crash, but it didn't crash. It actually took off. And how we're seeing these movements and just the rise and falls of empires and that wealth and value. And just, man, it was really wild. I mean, his perspective was for individuals to prepare yourself. If you're not going to be in political office in Congress or in the Senate or in the president's seat, how do you prepare yourself as just an individual for this? And this was all discussed from an economic perspective, from a financial perspective. Now, us in our discussions from a Christian values perspective, being a Christian in this world and how we behave, I'm trying to filter all my thoughts on that as I'm taking in and trying to just keep it in from an economic piece. And so, man, it's a weird thought, and it's kind of is that real? Right? He's one guy. He wrote a book. He's not the end all.
It was the 2008.
Called the 2008. Fall. That he's got it under his belt. Obviously, very smart individual. Helped manage $200-something billion in hedge fund money. But I'm just what's going on here? But if we look, and he talks about the signs that we're dealing with of just America as a whole and how we deal with political unrest. He discussed how divisive our politics are, which, as I've said before, I kind of have always been hesitant to believe that, because I didn't know if this was a Russian bot telling me that we were that divided. I see it politically, but it's are we, if you open the door, pulled up the hood, are they really that far apart? And his claim was, as I hear more people say, no, we're so far, we're polar opposites. Republicans are conservative Republicans. Democrats are liberal Democrats, and the mix in the middle is missing. Now, his position is that we need more moderates. We need more in the middle. He claimed even the president's office should not be super partisan, but kind of as much be moderate. Let the House, and
if we get
Senate,
two in our own camps, then the political parties are just pandering to their own base.
Right.
They don't have a middle to care about, so they actually just keep moving more radical one way or another.
Yeah, and I mean, he even discussed how, we're a big nation geographically, and so how there's people that'll move because we'll see pockets of some of those decision making being done, like in California and areas, and now you see these
mass exoduses.
And us being in Florida, we're seeing that.
We're reaping
watching
the benefits of it.
Benefits in some ways,
Yeah.
it has its own challenges, and I would agree that it's benefits. But when I have my brain on like I do today of cyclical things, there's rises and falls. What that it feels good today could be a challenge tomorrow, and how do you overcome that?
See, like the beauty of America to me is localized government. Like the fact that we keep giving more and more control over this executive branch. And these politicians that really probably aren't the smartest people in the world. Is just crazy to me. Like the more we can localize it from a state perspective, from a local perspective, the stronger we are, because I feel like the individual and the collective of the individuals are way smarter than a smart group of people that are disconnected. And I think actually that's the reason that we have, personally speaking, a leg up over China, is because they flip the opposite. They're so authoritarian.
They are.
And I watched this at the beginning of COVID when they kind of tried to spin it and act like we were so on top of it. They were not. It was chaos over there. They had no idea what they were doing. They were trying to cover it up. Instead of just letting the system, like in America, doctors would be able to go, hey, there's a problem here. There's discussion. There's free
but if you
there's
can't
free
admit
news.
There's a problem, we can't find a solution,
and things
right?
were done differently over here, where they're trying to cover it all up. And I saw tons of videos and images. People, they were dumping boulders on roads to try to keep people like locked into these communities. And I think the fact that it is this top control authoritarianism is nice from some perspective, because they get to steer things in a certain direction where the collective of a people might take longer to do so. But there's also so much more room for error. And that's where the innovation of the free market economy keeps us on top of things, where their top-down control is going to cap their innovation. We're seeing it here. The more we give control to the federal government, to the top political parties, the more innovation that we just cut off at the knee. And there has to be some boundaries there, but to think that these people know how to run our lives better than ourselves is in my personal opinion, crazy town. And that's what's stifling our innovation.
I always, in these discussions, try to think of it from a bunch of different viewpoints. And part of my viewpoint is what if you were a Chinese national and you grew up there, but you're super smart. You even came over maybe to MIT, which that, by the way, was one of his pieces that's a strength of the U.S. Most people say if they want to go to a good university, it's to the U.S. That they mention. It's very rarely outside the U.S. But if you grew up where that is your norm, the government positions and how they control things, that's just what you're used to. It's not weird to you. It's not off-putting, but you do have those talents and abilities. You may not have any issues with that and still be able to innovate in the country while not feeling pressured, because they allow you to do that. This isn't an argument one or the other. I always just like to play both viewpoints, because I'm with you in the camp of.
And they have like this sort of free market system, but there's definitely a level where, if the government wants to take interest in you, they have the ability to just basically take over. Like you're legally required to hand over anything the government wants at any time they want. Whereas in the U.S., we can go, no. You don't get to just come in here and, Apple can say, no, you're just because you're the government does not mean you have access to all of our user data. Sorry. End of discussion.
Well, I mean, the challenge is we can have our viewpoints all we want on it. But it may not change at the end of the day that the yen could become the currency of power and that the Central Reserve could become China.
It's possible.
It is very possible.
It's very possible. But I still think, and I saw a great thing from the previous head of Google. And he talked a lot about China, and he talked a lot about, kind of what in his viewpoint was, look, they're a real issue, but we can win if we out innovate them, and we control our tech. We control our chip manufacturing. We control patents in certain aspects to make sure that we stay ahead of them.
Yeah.
And we have the ability to do so, I think, because of our free market economy. Now,
Yeah.
there's some jumbled up in there, but I just saw how they handled COVID, and seems like they were
Yeah.
kind of fumbling all over themselves consistently.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, they barely
No.
survived this thing.
And
And
but they're eating our lunch when it comes to manipulating our social media and everything else. I mean, that's where they're winning. It's a digital war. The stuff that we see. I mean,
that's a good point.
there was where did
There
I
is
hear
a
this?
lot of
Where did I
digital
hear the
manipulation.
statistic? I'm not sure, but it was something. Did you tell me this? That 100% of Christians' web pages. Someone told me that they were on a show that there was an expert that said in the 90-something percentile of Christian-based Facebook starting groups were bot-driven, Russian bot-driven.
What?
That and many of
I
these
haven't heard
other
this.
internal discussion boards that political and civil unrest only empowers Russia and China, and they are winning the war at that.
Yeah. Well, so I go back to like, why did Rome fall? And I could be mistaken, but most of the time that I've seen that I've seen history on like, why did the empires fall? They got way too comfortable. They stopped needing to fight and to innovate, and they started eating each other alive, basically. In the sense of like, they started fighting over stupid stuff that didn't really matter, and they ended up just dividing their entire country.
Because they
And we
assume
see
it's
that
always going to be good.
yes, and we see that here in America. A lot of this like this idea that I'm owed something because I live here, or the flip flop is I'm an oppressor because I have it so good.
Yeah.
When it's just, it should go back to the individual person. We can't really control what we're born into, but we can control what we do with
Yeah.
it. And the idea that we need to give up our wealth to the government so they can redistribute it, or vice versa, do nothing because I happen to be an American and
Yeah.
get things for it, is what's destroying us.
Yeah. There was a saying, I'm going to butcher it, but basically, hard times make strong men, which strong men create comfortable times create weak men,
Yeah.
and weak men create hard times. And that's, I think, the Roman Empire. That's what we're entering into. That's
Yeah.
the wake-up call that I think we need to be aware of.
And I
There
think
was-
China does, on some level, they're hungrier.
They're disciplined.
they're
I'm telling you,
seriously disciplined.
That's, I think, the biggest thing from a business perspective. No matter if you showed up in a Chinese business, who's controlling, who has some ownership, when they say world order, the description of world order is how the game is played. The rules of chess, the rules of checkers, that's set by the world order.
Mm-hmm.
Their world order is set by that regime having ownership.
Mhm.
They show up, that's how they play.
Yeah.
But they still show up every day, disciplined like nobody's business,
Yeah.
and able to do things. And
I still think that gets you to a point, but we've seen over and over again, big top-down control, whether it's the
Yeah.
USSR or anyone else, like it's not sustainable and it falls apart at a point. Now,
at
how
a point,
much?
but how long is the point?
Yeah, that's the thing. Will they become so powerful and we become so diminished before it all falls apart? I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think if we turn the camera to ourselves as a country without the need for a world power of China, no matter what their government position is,
Mhm.
we're doing a pretty lousy job as a country. We're not moving in the right direction of discipline.
No,
and
not at all.
Now, certain areas, innovation, we're doing some pretty amazing things and
Yeah.
moving. And it made me think about all this stuff, and I can just go all over the board on it because it scares me to think as I say these things, or whether they be facts, opinion, they're all opinions, but it doesn't mean that I support that. I don't want to China as world power,
No.
but I'm just trying to
No.
say, hey, let's open every door and discuss every outcome. Now, the interesting part is we're two young guys making a podcast. Nobody's really calling us from the White House to discuss this, but it needs to be in a discussion forum that we're having these. The thing me and you talk about a lot is, though our views are very similar in most things, we need to be able to have open discussions with people of all types of belief. Because if we can't come together and agree on some things, which again, Russia, China, the powers against us are winning.
Mhm.
If we can't just sit down and say, hey, first of all, let me just tell you, I value you as an individual, I value you as a person. Here's the commonalities we have. Here's the beauty of you. Here's the beauty of me. oh, by the way, let's discuss some of these things. Not, oh, here's how we disagree on, I don't want to see you ever again. You can die for all I care. That's not healthy. It's being fueled. There was a discussion of, I saw this example to where you can put two groups of fire ants in a vial and they'll live peacefully. And then someone will shake the vial and then they'll fight each other. Someone's shaking our vial. We need to pay attention to who's shaking the vial.
Yeah.
Is kind of the piece that's going on. But you were talking for a minute about the COVID piece, and I was just reading an article. I sent it to a buddy of mine on, I can't think of her name. I'd mutilate it if I could remember it, but there's a female tennis player that made an accusation online that a high up government official had some sexual misconduct against her, and she disappeared. Like, finally they were asking enough, and they know where she is, or that she's alive, but her voice is completely muted. And then there's this kind of a nonpartisan investigative reporters that are pointing out quickly how they can see the machine that is the Chinese government media control immediately go into place. So they immediately suppress on the search engine search words. They did not remove her profile completely because it would have been too weird and too obvious if her name completely disappeared from the Chinese search interwebs, but quickly and adjusted and started putting out data, diffusing, trying to point fingers elsewhere. That is so scary. That is a movie if I've ever seen one being played on reality. And to your point, that's the fear that we have as Americans, that the same thing will happen. You want to go down a weird rabbit hole of government regulation and control against a private company, say Facebook,
it's a scary
and what
idea.
they do and what that is. And if government can have control, but
sounds real good if it's the thing that you want silenced. But
well, exactly.
It just takes
my
the
fear
wrong
is I don't
leader.
care who you are. Exactly to your point. I want you to have freedom of speech. Whether you say things that make my blood boil, you should have the right to be able to say those things.
Yes, exactly. Because who gets to dictate what's
right and wrong?
What's right and wrong?
And that's the interesting piece. So if we took that into Christianity, because as Christians, and we see a lot of times in our churches, people will say, well, we should be able to do that as long as it follows along a Christian value pathway. Is that the true answer or not? Is that what it needs to be? Is the yes or no? Because I think we would all agree if we open that up, we need to all admit that that's not to say we should silence the people that disagree with what our values are. That goes to the verses of some may trust in horses, some may trust in chariots. We will trust in the name of our Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Lord said, pay to Caesar what is Caesar's.
Yeah.
That's that we do not follow. I love our pastor that we go to church with, say, we do not follow any political power. We follow the Lord, and he's going to be there regardless of who's in office. But anyways, I
think we see this in the Bible a lot too. Like Paul talks about a lot about liberties. There are certain essentials of the faith, right? Like talk about Jesus was God. He died. He rose again. He saved it. Like there are certain core aspects of the faith, but there are so many things that are left up to a liberty. What might be right for one might be wrong for another.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't see, especially in the New Testament, like you see some in the law, like these are boundaries, but you don't see a ton of things that are like drinking is hard, like wrong. You see like drunkenness is wrong, and then there's a gray area in the middle, and it might depend on the person because what's right for one person might be. I'm not saying like certain things. I'm not saying every single thing is.
Well, there's two differences. There's criminal legal precedents, which we're not talking about.
Yeah, no.
And then freedom of speech to discuss items. And that's, if we go to a whole different segue of people, I love Erwin McManus. I've talked about him a bunch, but he does a really good point to say people that are anarchists or non-believers in all forms, they'll say things like, that's inhumane. Because we'll talk about how there's a killer whale will play with its prey. It will literally play with it. Dolphins sometimes will do that too. They'll throw the fish in the air, joke with it before they bite its head off. They say, well, that's just how animals behave. That's what they do. It's animals. Yet they'll argue that we come from animals, and then they'll say, well, that's inhumane for a human to do that. And he points out to say how even interwoven in the deepest of non-believers, how they fail to recognize what is the definition of inhumane? And it is biblical values.
Yeah.
Honestly, that's what we go to.
Yeah.
Is do not kill, do not lie. Those are pieces that any infrastructure, even within a non-religious organization, bases as their piece.
The idea of the 10 Commandments being given, that was kind of a radical thing, right?
Yeah.
Like that, these were like 10 big guidelines
Sure.
that God was given. And that's what a lot of our basis of morality and our structures of like what you say is humane is still based on today is this Judeo-Christian like value system.
But Erwin's
by God.
point in that discussion is that God has put that on our heart already. That interwoven
I see
with
what
us
you're saying. Yeah.
is an innate knowledge of right and wrong.
Yeah.
That is God breathed, and the idea that even though we have never seen a perfect world, we know what the idea of a perfect world would be. How do we have that image of what a perfect world would be? A world without hunger, without war, because we've never seen it. It's never been evident. So it's woven in our inner being of what that is, and that's God breathed. It was a cool perspective to hear it that way.
Yeah.
But back to that discussion of the rising world powers in America and where we're at, it makes us realize we got to pay attention to ourselves. What are the answers to this? And it's a lot of question, but that's what I'm scared of, is that it's so big. It's such a moving animal, such a beast on its own.
Mm-hmm.
How do we behave? But I think discussions amongst people and loving our neighbors and pouring into people is a good way to start it. And us Christians in our communities are the most guilty at times of throwing stones at people, of not leaving a door open to a relationship, of showing hate and spewing negative against people before they even know them or have walked anywhere in their shoes.
Yeah.
And I think we're guilty of that, and we need to do a better job of repairing that. That doesn't mean we sacrifice what our values are. It means that we love first and teach truth second.
Yeah. Because we're just as screwed up. I mean, we didn't come to the faith perfect, right?
Yeah.
Like there's some level of we're, just because we believe in Jesus does not mean we're perfect and everything's fixed anyway. So coming back to looking in the mirror, and I think this is good for Christians constantly. Like I think God's always wanting to refine us and want us to look at ourselves and realize like where we have pitfalls. But just as a society and as a country too, one of the biggest problems is we keep wanting to blame and throw stones at everyone else.
Yeah.
And have other people fix our problems instead of looking in the mirror and going, what could I do differently with the situation that I am in?
Right.
What could I start? What could I move towards? What could I stop doing that would change my situation today, instead of being mad at some politician or leadership figure or whatever, and hoping that they're going to solve all of our problems.
Yeah.
And if we start looking at ourselves, we start as a society growing.
Yeah.
Instead of just blaming everyone else, seeing the mass amount of wealth with these big companies and wanting to eat them alive, and then wondering why are there no jobs, and why is there no economy, and why is it? Well, we pushed and destroyed all the big things that were innovators in our country to other places because we basically tried to eat them alive.
Yeah. Some people try to do it in the name of justice. But the Bible has some pretty strong stances around justice and being stance for justice. And I've really had to challenge my thinking, because I have a very conservative view typically on what that looks like, when especially justice for orphans, justice for minorities, and those pieces, and how we stand and look at those pieces. But we have allowed those same discussions to filter into capitalistic discussions, and how money should be divided up. And that's an unfortunate thing that should be divided. I don't think, and again, where we come back to, it makes any sense from a capitalistic society to give big government a power. I think what you've alluded to earlier, any historical discussions around that have never ended well.
No.
Now, America may not be the superpower forever and ever for our great grandkids. It may not be.
It's never worked.
It's never held that way.
I think we still have one of the greatest systems that's ever been invented. But
as long as it can hold, right? I mean, I think part of the challenge with that too is I did some ancestry.com studies and
Oh,
tried to
yeah.
follow the McDonald name, and I got them to like 1760 in North Carolina, and then
How
it
does that work,
disappeared.
by the way? Like,
How do you work? So
like they
good
do
thing is
blood or
census. No, census data.
Okay.
And so you have to do the legwork. So I would go in. Of course, I can follow great pretty quick. Its family knows who that is. Other people have done legwork, but if you don't know, you would go back and thankfully it's all digitally scanned, and then that writing is transposed into typing, which you can search at that point. And so I could find, and so I could search a McDonald in the Memphis, Tennessee area in the mid 1900s. I can find them, and I can go back to the last census before that, and then it lines up that my great grandfather was 26 years old in 1940. But if I go to the 1920 census, then I see this 6-year-old in the 1920 census in the West Memphis, Tennessee, Arkansas area, and I know that to be him. Well, I can see his family.
Okay.
You kind of
And then you can kinda
backtrack.
keep
You just
tracking back
follow
and
it
back and
around,
back.
and sometimes if they've moved large distances, I feel bad for the people that try to search me as when many years from now has moved around. But back then it was easy because family was within a lot of times miles of each other, or just a mile of each other, many generations. So sometimes you could look and you could go up and down because literally the census taker was walking down the street taking information, and you could just follow it around and look for another McDonald and find that. But either way, you came to this mid 1600s out of Scottish background, poor, hungry, needing liberty from a oppressive group that found America and dug in and started working hard. Poor sharecroppers doing what they could to build business, and how that came.
When was this?
Mid 1700s.
Okay.
Was-
you said 1600s. I'm like,
Nope. No, or mid 1700s.
Okay.
Right as we were coming, it had
like, I don't
hit-
think we were here yet.
woven through into Alabama, kind of
Wow.
wove through up, and because of my father ended in Tennessee, but a lot of ancestry in Alabama. But my point is that you had these generations of all they knew. They didn't know wealth. They didn't know comfort at all.
Mhm.
Discomfort was all they knew. So finding a new world where at least they were given the chance to create their own
Mhm.
comfort level to live in their little piece of the world, a little piece
Mhm.
of earth that they could work. They were still poor as church mice, but it was theirs. And then they built and grew and hunger and strived. And what happens though is you get in the second generation, third generation, fourth, fifth, sixth generation, comfort starts to build in as wealth builds, comfort level hits. And unfortunately, statistics show as that comfort level builds, the desire to really work hard, there is no more hunger much anymore. It's how do you raise a child to have that hunger to know without knowing what that pain was? And society can slide because they don't work hard
Yeah.
anymore, and they give up. They don't try anymore. The money disappears. Statistics show financially that by the third or fourth generation of wealth, the wealth is gone. You can't even make it to the third or fourth because some kid did not know what it meant to work for it and spends it unknowingly just without a care, and it's gone.
Yeah.
And that's what I think I see with we as Americans. Also, we get mad about immigration and immigrants in society because they're taking jobs from us. Yet we have a lot of, unfortunately, society of our own that's 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 12th generations that aren't working hard. We're not showing up. We're not putting in the work. I mean, people are throwing millennials under the bus, now throwing Gen Z under the bus. To watch some studies discuss about them. It's not necessarily that they don't want to work. They just don't want to work in the same way that the baby boomers want to work. Baby
Yeah.
boomers don't like that. They want to see a replication.
Yeah.
There's still a desire to work. It just is on their own terms in a
Yeah.
lot of ways.
Well, I think they see too that the economy's changed. It's not go get a factory job and do one of the great things is we have such opportunity right now, more
Yeah.
opportunity than ever to make a name and to build a business and to do a thing.
It's funny, it's interesting, and this isn't necessarily that you meant to say it, but you said don't just go get a factory job. But the challenge we see is people getting so mad at companies for innovating robotics and things to do work that take jobs.
Yeah.
Yet people aren't wanting to show up to do the work anymore and do it in that form
That's
and
true.
fashion. And so you can't have it both ways.
I have a family member that I met multiple family members that do work in manufacturing plants, and they're
Yeah.
like, we're working overtime because nobody wants to come work.
Yeah, Elon Musk wrote about how his fear of innovation of things like airplanes, space shuttles is what he's working
Yeah.
on. How we hit this plateau of lack of innovation because tech companies grew so big,
Yeah.
and all of the minds and creative energy because that's where the money's been has been in software and tech. And he's challenging. We need to pull some of that talent back over to the physical hardware world so we can
Mhm.
see where we could go. You watched Back to the Future in the original when it came up to 2020 area. I don't remember exactly what year, but we're right about where it happened. And everything's been a lot of it's been pretty accurate from a standpoint of like TVs and flat screens hanging on walls and way we can communicate video wise. But the flying car piece, we're not there. Anti-gravity, but he challenges maybe we could have been there if we had more minds focused on it.
I mean, look at what happened with COVID and the vaccine. Like,
How quickly?
say what you will, but like the fact that we developed that so quick, is
Yeah.
bonkers.
Yeah, no, I mean,
it's
I think-
it's insane.
well, I mean, if we go to a leadership discussion and where leaders are formed, there's a great podcast about, I think, 13 Minutes to Landing, what it's called. And it was when it goes all the way to the beginning when JFK made the announcement we were in this Cold War, a battle with Russia of who's going to get to the moon first. And JFK steps up and says, we are going to the moon. And it's an iconic speech that he gave in Dallas, I believe. And he claimed this. You got to remember, granted, at the time, we had no NASA, no space program at all. Yet
The
he
people behind him were probably like,
boldly said in front that we're going to
What?
go to the moon.
what is he crazy?
Yeah. But because that
He's
pressure
lost
of
his-
leadership, that decision to push and to innovate and to grow, look how quickly we got there. The average age of someone working in at home base at NASA when the space shuttle landed was 26 years old. That was the average age of an individual
Wow.
sitting in that room. It was amazing, the youth and the technology that were created, and that's what we have in us. And like even in a segue to like kind of the notes that we had of discussion points where we talk about where God plants you and trying to figure out, especially as a old side of the millennial standpoint, you would be on the younger side of the millennial
Mhm.
age group and trying to figure out how. I think a challenge for us growing up in a really great movie world, TV world,
Mhm.
also where you can get really quick satisfaction, and our attention spans are shorter and shorter. We don't want to watch 2-hour movies anymore. We'd rather watch 30-minute shows, but actually now, could you just give me like 30-second to a minute videos and I'll watch a bunch of those? The attention spans go to nothing. But also we have this tendency to believe, I say we just generationally, that we are the stars of our own show. We expect that some amazing experience should happen to us at any one time.
Mhm.
And in the book that I've referenced before, Just Do Something, it's about we have got to get comfortable as Christians with monotony, with what the
Yeah.
idea is of just,
Yeah.
hey, this may not be that you're going to move immediately up
Mhm.
and God's going to put you in the CEO role. There is time and energy involved in building an experience. And, you kind of had some notes or thoughts around the challenge of maybe even it was just the motives of dreaming big.
Yeah, I think you got to be careful when you start something of getting this really big idea that in your head is just going to take off. It's just going to, there's going to be tons of money and tons of fame, and you want to maybe start something with the idea to succeed, but at the same time, it kind of puts this false narrative in your head, and when you hit the first stumbling block,
Yeah.
you stop. I think of like David, he was a shepherd in the fields, and probably pretty monotonous work, but all the things that he learned to do prepared him for his fight with Goliath.
Yeah.
Like it says in there, I fought lions and bears.
yeah.
Like he said that to
Yeah.
King Saul, like, this is nothing. I will take care of
Yeah.
with God behind me. And he learned how to become, still and quiet in the field by himself, spending a lot of time with God.
Sure.
I'm sure there was a huge relationship there. I think he wrote a lot of the Psalms while he was a shepherd as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Most of the Psalms were written later in his
Maybe
leadership.
I'm mistaken. Maybe some
This
of
was
them were.
much further, and you can tell by it's sometimes that flag word
Progress.
pompousness
Yeah.
in how he talks about
But-
being a leader and what the Lord's blessed him with. But yes, either
There
way,
had to be
he
like a
spent
level
lots of time
with God, a confidence building with God, fighting these lions and bears to protect these sheep. and doing all these things. And it's like, man, why am I here? Why am I in the middle of it? This is pointless. This is meaningless. Like, and God took something that seemingly was insignificant and turned the tides of a massive, like the Philistines were ready to conquer the armies, like, and Israel was shaking in their boots, and here comes David, like, what are you guys scared for?
Sure.
This is ridiculous. And God took what was prepared in the quiet and the secret place, basically, to use it for a really awesome thing.
As a movie lover as I am, I like to segue the idea of David and Goliath to the Karate Kid movie. Remember when Karate Kid and the
wax on,
yeah, exactly, the wax on, wax off.
Yes.
He didn't know what it was.
I
He
was
didn't know
thinking
what he
that
was
when you were
training for.
talking. Yeah,
he didn't know why he was spending all that time hitting lions and bears with the rock until I was like, whoa, wait a second, how did this come so natural that I was so accurate with this one stone to be able to do this? But what I appreciate with what you're saying is exactly what so many business owners and young business owners want to say. They don't see results immediately. They want to quit, which is actually a lot of them do. Like, that's a leg up for me a lot of times as a business owner, is that I know others are going to quit because they don't have any grit to stick it out, to see things through or fail often. If people understood how much failure meant in their business as far as learning and applying what they've learned and growing, they would be more appreciative of the failures instead of just running out on it. And so I think interpreting kind of your discussion on it, there are some pieces to say that no matter what role someone's in, God needs them, and maybe even in that role. And it may be not as flashy or glamorous as what they expected God to use them in a role on. I think that's some of your discussion point is, hey, God has you here for a reason. It may not be in some amazing way, but there's still something to be learned from it. God's still at work there, and you can still walk alongside him.
Be diligent, do the best you can, and give God the outcome of that work.
Yeah,
and what he can do with it, because I assure you, it's way bigger than anything that you can imagine.
Yeah,
and it may be that it ends insignificant, but God uses it for a later thing. I think of like the guy that plays drums for Elevation. He talked about that. Like, how did you get to this position? It's amazing. It's like, you're the worship drummer for Elevation, like the biggest worship band. And he's just like, God just led me into this, and I was just faithful, and I did it. I didn't start like with this idea of big fame, but man, God used my diligence in the times that it seemed insignificant to do something significant.
Yeah. And I think that's what we miss. That's what social media has created people to miss, is they see this flashy experience, but most of the time, 9 times out of 10, they don't see all the mundane, monotonous practice and work that went on in the background. We always talk a lot about Steph Curry is a great one. He just passed the top amount of 3 points in NBA history in a game a couple nights ago. He has the most 3-pointers of anyone in history. But can we imagine how many hours he spent preparing and learning how to shoot those threes? It's early mornings, and that's easy. That's an easy story because it's a win. But to your point, we have the benefit of hindsight in that we see this star and we get to talk about it. But people that are in the middle of it, they don't have the ability of hindsight. They haven't reached the peak. They haven't accomplished whatever God wanted them to accomplish. And so they can't look back on it. And again, it may not be something as big as an NBA 3-point record that we accomplish even in the way. It could literally be that we have to recognize we're not the star in our show. Yeah. First of all, God's number one, but also we may be a minor character. We have to recognize that it could be 3 generations from now that someone's conversion to Christianity that raises a child in the Lord, that person that raises a child in the Lord, that child may do something amazing for God. Yeah. And that's the time frame that God may be on for that. We're just not wanting to see the world in God's perspective of time. We want to see it in ours. But Steve Harvey, that's not very exciting to business owners, by the way, but it's part of it, right? As we embrace.
Well, it could be really encouraging though, when you're in this like wilderness of storm where, why am I here? What am I doing? And maybe you feel like, man, I feel like God led me into this thing.
Yeah.
It's not worked out like I thought. And I don't know what I'm doing here. And it could be a huge uplift to go, hey, if God led you into it and you're being diligent, let him control it and let him do the outcome, and just do the best you can of the work for the Lord, because he's got a plan with it.
Yeah. And I think I love, even not necessarily, it's more of a secular awareness, but But if we have a mindedness from the Lord's perspective of generations, just like he does, and we think about for the benefit of our great grandkids and what it'll be. I love that analogy that any tree that someone rests under, someone planted many years before them, and
tree,
likely never got the chance to rest under the tree.
Yeah.
But they still planted it anyways.
Yeah, because we see ourselves in like this such a narrow like, world and time frame and everything else. And it's just not that way.
But there was this clip. It claims that Steve Harvey was the author of these, but I pulled this from social media. So, and I've seen a lot of videos where he does speak to audiences of shows, not about the show, and he really encouraged them a lot. There's some really good clips about him speaking about his Christianity, speaking about how you have to try hard and work hard, and his is sometimes as a manifestation perspective.
He's had some good. He's kind of jumping off a cliff recently. I don't know if you.
I haven't.
He's on this whole like. There's many ways to heaven, and there's many God. There's he's kind of veered off that path.
That's not what I'm about to read about, but it might bring a good.
There might
discussion.
be some good. Yeah, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah. Well, he said it claims that I like this quote to say you have to aspire to something so great that you have to have God's help, and it's an interesting concept to look at to say that's what our faith has to be, and business world says, life begins at the end of your comfort zone. And I think in a lot of ways, we think if we're going to really stretch ourselves and grow to do what the Lord is, or let him work, are we willing to do stuff that only God can accomplish because we couldn't do it?